Those who have followed the dwindling online presence of thoughtless illustration racist and Tom Cruise impersonator Amanda Marcotte knows how utterly nasty and full of shit she is, and therefore understand what she writes should be mined for whatever nuggets of entertainment value one can, and if that isn't possible, to make your own fun. Which is, as you know, what I'm all about. Marcotte's talent seems to be her ability to crank out poisonous agenda-laden crap in 15 minutes or less, time she saves by eliminating facts, research, and the understanding that those other 7 billion people aren't squatting on her planet. Instead, she works off the well-worn victim narrative as interpreted through her own smug, condescending sensibilities. That is, when she's not just entirely making shit up off the top of her head. In that way, she does double duty as a screeching sack of neurotic squirrel bait and a cynical shill who knows exactly what she's doing and writes what she does because the marketplace of manufactured outrage is the only niche she hasn't been squeezed out of like a greasy turd. Like a lot of the hipster slacker douchebags that exploit this niche, Marcotte's works, such as It's a Jungle Out There, the feminist survival guide to politically inhospitable environments, is really just a collection of pop culture references mixed in with snark and self-obsession, proving that she, like other girl-on-the-internet pop culture critics, excels at watching as much television as any other inert couch potato and then rousing themselves to pitch Jezebel an article on how Mr. Ed is obviously too white and kind of rapey, and then retiring to the girl cave where determined buzzing is heard all night. There's really no word that adequately captures Marcotte's toxic cocktail of unjustified superiority and sanctimonious idiocy, unless we actually invent a word for it. I thought of femtitlement, but when I tried to use the hashtag, I found that Steve Vanden Eykel had thought it up months ago and has been sitting on it like the ninja camper prick he is, which leaves no recourse but to run with the hashtag, give me all the credit, and I'll send Steve a t-shirt or something. Anyway, in case you aren't getting what I'm suggesting because I'm being too subtle, Amanda Marcotte is a specimen of what the deceptively named social justice and gender feminist doom cults have managed to produce and promote and vice versa, with all the mean and stupid circle jerking that implies. The people who Amanda Marcotte supports and who support her are not rebels or radicals or visionaries. They don't give a shit about justice, social or otherwise. Their convictions are to be used as bludgeons to beat people with and then be tossed into the bushes when they become inconvenient or worse, evidence. They are the status quo of a complacent, incurious, entrenched, self-serving elite of hypocrisy and stupidity that infect online communities. They just suck. And in sucking, they demonstrate exactly the lack of journalistic ethics and common decency that Gamergate has been on about. So keep that in mind as we now read through Amanda Marcotte's shit-poor excuse for journalism as she comments on what happened to Allison Tiemann and the Honey Badger Brigade at this year's Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. As Marcotte's prose needs to be read in a voice that can capture the full range of her whiny mean girl entitlement, I'm going to employ the vocal talents of creepy Bittergrrrl to bring Marcotte's special blend of hating everything that isn't her to life.
Misogynist disrupt sci-fi convention. Play the victim when kicked out.
Well, this isn't going to go quick considering the headline itself is a staggering concentration of factual inaccuracy. The Honey Badger Brigade aren't misogynist, not just because the word has been rendered absolutely meaningless, used to describe anything the person casually tossing it around doesn't like, and takes its place among words in the roles of politically motivated name-calling. The Honey Badger Brigade is composed of both men and women. Does that mean the men involved are straight-up women haters, while the women have a choice of being women haters and, as a bonus, self-hating as well? No one among the Honey Badger Brigade disrupted the expo. Not even by the most expansive definition of the word, and not compared to other people who were shouting out at the panel where Alison Tiemann spoke, and certainly not by the horn-blasting, fire-alarm-pulling standards of college feminists that gleefully shut down any and all discussion by virtue of treating the world in all its varied glory like their own personal safe space. The Honey Badger Brigade didn't play victim. They were victims of harassment and exclusion. Marcotte is just so used to the trigger warning nonsense coming from insincere professional victims that she's long forgotten that victimization isn't a matter of how one acts, but how one is acted on. The Honey Badger Brigade didn't do anything. Rather, things were done to them, and only a heartless idiot like Marcotte could see Alison Tiemann's tearful reaction and think she was playing. You would also think Marcotte would have some empathy, at least the same she demands from everyone else for all slights real and imagined, but apparently all that auditing at the Scientology Celebrity Center has driven that mushy human emotion right out of her. Oh yes, and it wasn't a sci-fi convention. It was a comic expo. So, in 10 words, Marcotte manages to pack in 4 factual errors. Now, a 40% bullshit rate might seem bad for anyone else, but in Marcotte's case, it just means she wasn't really trying. When she puts her mind, what it is, to the task, she can easily achieve 98% bullshit, the non-bullshit component being the punctuation and the spaces between words. One could also think, if it takes that much to correct the headline, for fuck's sake, we are in for a rough ride fisking the other 1,000 words of her raw story hit piece. Maybe we should all just leave right now, before it gets worse. 'Cause you know it will.
Regular readers who follow the increasingly bizarre antics of men's rights activists, MRAs, have probably seen this strange story of a Gamergate-affiliated attempt to disrupt the Calgary Expo, a sci-fi convention.
How the wheel turns. Isn't that the same haughty phrase, increasingly bizarre antics? And Marcotte doesn't even bother to detail what these antics are, as the hive mind knows. Isn't that what all fat and happy elites use when the suffering folk intrude on their good time? In fact, if you roll things back 100 years, isn't that exactly the sniffing remark you would expect from an upper-class Twit of the Year finalist directed at, say, the suffragettes? Or even earlier, why can't those people just pick cotton and sing? What on earth is wrong with them? And once again, it was the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo, not a science fiction convention. What's the difference? At a comic expo, the emphasis is on comic books and the media derived from them. For instance, AMC's The Walking Dead was tied into the Calgary Expo, but that's because the TV show and game was based on a series of graphic novels, a term coined for those who wish to be snooty about comic books. The subjects of these comics and media tend to be the superhero, fantasy, and horror genres, and to celebrate them, people walk around, with their tits out if at all possible, in embarrassing cosplay costumes that reflect this fare, and reflect sneaking out without mom seeing them. Whereas at a science fiction convention, the emphasis is on science fiction as a genre and all media derived from it, and those tend to be filled with fanboys dressed as morbidly obese Klingon virgins.
Apparently targeted because MRAs are pissed about their anti-harassment policies. Protecting the right to harass is a #1 concern for MRAs, and has driven most of Gamergate's energy.
Apparently, Marcotte pulled that assumption right out of her asshole, where she keeps her journalistic ethics, an overnight bag stuffed with C batteries, and a chaise lounge should strategic fainting become necessary. The only documented harassment in this whole mess was conducted by the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo, as well as fashionista feminists who are open to discussion, provided the discussion is a monologue where they talk and you poor bastard, only get to listen, and a cadre of ill-informed tut-tutting scolds live tweeting about just how awful it was that a diverse group of egalitarians with men's rights and Gamergate connections made them feel so unsafe. That being the case, then maybe everyone should be concerned about harassment policies and the off-label way they're being used in the service of silencing discussion and encouraging mindless and abusive moral panics.
A group that calls themselves the Honey Badgers, a group that exists to put a female face on movement misogyny.
Yes, because that's what the honey badgers do, and doing that misogyny, defined by this Venn diagram, is about all they do. And as suspected, it really is all about Amanda. She's the warm center of it all, including the misogyny. What the Honey Badgers did was raise money from their supporters to go to CalX to promote Alison Tieman's comic and at the same time to oppose censorship in gaming, among other places. The Honey Badgers weren't opposing women, made no negative comments about women. What they were opposing was censorship. The special snowflakes saw one of the Honey Badger's anti-censorship posters, saw that it had the Gamergate logo on it, and decided the only reasonable thing to do was to censor it, making up whatever justification they needed as they went along. Now, misogyny is the hatred of women, pathologically or casually, not only for simply being women, but for expressing thoughts and opinions of women or as women. Then really, where is the misogyny here? That's right. It's in the defective equipment between Amanda Marcotte's chair and her keyboard. This female face on misogyny is simply Marcotte's way of reserving special contempt for the women in the Honey Badger Brigade, not only because of the inclusive, diverse, and egalitarian opinions they express, but because they are women. And because they are not on board with the selective, targeted censorship that Amanda Marcotte supports against people who don't think as she does. And so in this little gender traitor construct of hers, she's the one expressing hatred towards women because they are women. Besides, what sort of conceited cognitive embolism has led someone like Marcotte to believe that women, or anyone else for that matter, have to pass her agenda-driven purity test in order to be considered legitimate? Nasty ideological feminists began thinking they could define who was and wasn't a feminist. Through Not Your Shield, they could tell the good ones from the bad ones. And of course, they've always thought they could define what a real man was. And now women need their pink brand of approval to be women.
Even though the group is half male.
Which half? It's the bottom half, right? I figured that's the only half she would obsess with anyway. Under any other circumstances, especially involving people running patterns in her approved ideological playbook, diversity would be a good thing. However, under the special exemption that anything she doesn't like is suspect, their diversity becomes just another opportunity for uncharitable interpretations. Apparently, Amanda Marcotte thinks women, or at least women who are not her and hers, can't think for themselves, and so it must be men and feminists who have to do their thinking for them. When people like Marcotte and the Calgary Expo talk about diversity, what they want is diversity, just like us. Nothing less, but more importantly, nothing more.
In an ill-fated attempt to pretend it's not misogyny.
Go ahead, toss the word in a few more times, pezhead. The incident at the Calgary Expo completely blew up on the organizers, the social justice clowns who aren't very social or just, and the perversely women-hating feminists And so this attempt at damage control by flinging that pejorative misogyny is just laughable. What was done to the honey badgers isn't going away anytime soon. Although it's some of the same old shit, it's an escalation of the same old shit. It's significant because with the ejection of the Honey Badger Brigade, who did nothing to warrant it, and the banning for life of Allison Tiemann from Expo events for doing even less to warrant that, demonstrates the increasingly eliminationist mindset of the entrenched elite who have infected the atheist and skeptical community, the gaming community, and any other community they can get past distracted immune systems. Now people are to be punished not for what they said or for what they did, but merely for existing. The longer it's talked about, the more the facts of what happened, the objective reality of it, comes out. And the more people like Marcotte will be revealed as shills, excusing and even promoting abuses of power. The suggestion that the women of the Honey Badger Brigade were there as cover for misogynistic men, that they have no agency of their own, is not only insulting, but shows how casually sexist and authoritarian idiot like Marcotte can be when she's flying on autopilot.
Showed up to troll the conference and got kicked out, which was entirely predictable as they knew they were breaking the no harassment rules, and suggest that this was a plot to get kicked out so they could preen about how they were all victims of the feminazi cops.
One of the sure signs of propagandistic horseshit is when the writer, here typified by Marcotte, spends far more time telling you what people are, misogynists, harassers, and trolls, or commies, Jews, what have you, than telling you what they did and what actually happened so the reader can apply their own judgment. Now, I may be guilty of a little of that myself, but that's only because Marcotte is a lying, dissembling asshole who writes crap, dresses funny, and looks like Top Gun. Being a rigid ideologue and strategically incurious, Marcotte either doesn't know what happened, having gotten her information from within the drive-through window at the echo chamber, or more likely is just willfully ignorant because she knows it wouldn't fit the narrative. And letting the reader make a judgment call? She'll do your thinking for you. Thank you so very much. Well, Marcotte can't tell you what the Honey Badgers did because the Calgary Expo can't. Nowhere in their public statements, filled with bullshit obfuscation and praising free expression with one hand while taking it away with the other, did the Calgary Expo cite one rule, one, that the Honey Badgers broke. Marcotte's purpose here, like the Expo, is essentially eliminationist. She needs to other the Honey Badgers, convince her readers, apprenticed to her mean-spirited, ignorant tutelage, that the Honey Badgers' beliefs, which she can't honestly report, means they deserve to be placed outside the moral sphere, where anything done to them is justified. As with much of Marcotte's other writings, this is nothing more than the playbill to a lynching. Some people, so the victim narrative goes, are so triggering, so upsetting, that not only their opinions cannot be tolerated, but also their mere presence. They are not to be opposed. They are to be eliminated. Often it leads to the sort of shunning and banning that the Calgary Expo practiced and Marcotte approves. However, the rhetoric is in place for something more sinister. Of course, as an eliminationist, you can express all those thoughts and also claim misandry doesn't exist. You can claim to be a victim of nothing more than your own subjective mental vacuum and use that as a pretext for victimizing others. You can just suck. Anyway, it bears repeating that there was no way the Honey Badger Brigade could have known they were breaking the no harassment rule any more than someone pulled over for driving while black can know what the hell it was they were supposed to have done. Because they didn't do anything except be black. That's the point. There was no harassment committed by the Honey Badger Brigade, and the claim that they did is just a pretext for the Expo organizers and social justice useful idiots to harass and to exclude them. And considering it was the Honey Badger Brigade that was harassed, Marcotte is not only engaging in victim blaming, as the phrase goes, but she's less than subtly implying that they were just asking for it. They were just sashaying around, jiggling their men's rights and Gamergate assets in everyone's face like bitches in heat, and so had it coming. So maybe we should stop telling victims of third-wave feminist harassment and social justice gang rape not to get harassed and raped, and tell feminists and social justice warriors to stop harassing and raping. After all, conversation is not consent.
Knowing the Calgary Expo doesn't want to be party to hate speech, the honey badgers use false pretenses to get in, according to the Mary Sue.
According to the Mary Sue. Yeah. I would like to share some late-breaking news on what Jews are up to from this little pamphlet here called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But first, let's hear from the Mary Sue. And that the Mary Sue had promotional ventures with the Calgary Comic Expo in no way indicates a sort of collusion between who reports and who is reported on that Gamergate has drawn attention to. I mean, you would have to be a paranoid tinfoil hatter to think so, right? Anyway.
However, the Honey Badger Radio did not use their website to apply for vendor exhibitor status. The Honey Badger Brigade on the Calgary Expo website links to a webcomic site run by Honey Badger Teeman instead. If you didn't think all this was enough to warrant expulsion from the convention, it is. There's more.
Although Allison Teeman initially registered under the name of her Xenospora Comics label, by the time of the Expo, the Honey Badger Brigade was registered as the Honey Badger Brigade, and that is reflected in the Expo's own registration list and the exhibitor badges they passed out. Both say Honey Badger Brigade. So if there's any false pretense, it must be in the Honey Badgers not making complete disclosure of any and all associations they may have had as a group or as individuals, professional or otherwise. And if that's the case, then I'm sure this level of self-reporting was demanded of all the other exhibitors, right? The infiltration accusation doesn't fit with the claim that the Calgary Expo is an inclusive and diverse event. If people are infiltrating, then there must be some views well within the mainstream of comics and gaming and free expression that the Calgary Comic Expo won't allow. And no, you don't get to make the, well, the Expo wouldn't let the Ku Klux Klan in argument. Go fuck yourself.
Once there, they trolled and took over a panel on women in comics, insisting that the conversation be about men in comics.
Like, in the eyes of so many of these men's rights activist types, or...
Would you like us to field that question? Would you like us to field that question?
Sure.
Because I am a men's rights activist, so you can hate on me. The reason why I don't like feminism is because you promote this idea that women are defined by being victims. If you look at the context of all of your issues, men also face considerable problems as well. And they need to be brought into the story, and not just for men's sake, because this hides men's vulnerability, also for the sake of challenging the notion that women are defined as victims.
Nope. Didn't happen, Amanda. And with the extensive research she's obviously done, she should also know there's a recording of the non-incident in question. Allison Teeman gave a calm, thoughtful response to comments made about MRAs, a topic that she didn't bring up. That Marcotte, if she had done the work, knows there's a recording, and everyone but her dumbass readership has heard it, tells us a lot more about Amanda Marcotte, that she's lazy or a liar and has no fear that her readership will think outside of the social justice hug box, than it does about Allison Teeman's totally respectful and non-disruptive comments. Someone insisted that the conversation be about men and comics. Maybe someone insisted, but it wasn't Allison Tiemann or any of the honey badgers in attendance. It was another woman, either a participant or panelist, that asked an open-ended question about MRAs that Tiemann politely asked to answer, was granted permission, and did so in a calm, reasonable, and brief manner.
The excuse for this was to argue that speaking of men in comics is somehow verboten, an assertion easy to disprove by popping into any panel where popular male characters like Superman, the Arrow, all of the Avengers, but Black Widow, etc. are discussed. You know, the usual misogynistic bullshit.
You know what really happened, Amanda? A bunch of women got together to talk about women in comics and completely failed the Bechdel test. They had all the opportunity to talk about women, and instead they started talking about the favorite subject of these women, including Marcotte, which is men. They just can't help themselves. None of which is the fault of Allison Tiemann or the Honey Badgers, because they didn't bring the subject up. And after all, what we have here is a story about a group of mostly women, where the women are most visible, being harassed and excluded by another group of women, and Amanda Marcotte has to go make it all about men, and then accuse other people of making it all about men. You know, the usual misogynistic and bonus misandrist bullshit.
What really amazed me about this entire fiasco is how far MRA types have crawled up their own asses.
Uh-huh. She should share her butt pucker interior design tips with us. Amanda Marcotte spent so much time up her own asshole that her large intestine must be positively feng shui by now.
Unable to admit directly that they desire a world where women are marginalized and objectified.
Blah, blah, fucking blah. This is not just lazy. This is the cognitive equivalent of someone's handwriting going to shit at the bottom of the page. Marcotte has clear signs of mental cramping, indicated by her resorting to stock phrases like marginalized and objectified. That has nothing to do with anything that happened and indicates Marcotte is now in a life or death struggle with her MRA grappling dummy. Note Amanda Marcotte's ability to know what's going on in other people's minds at a distance in the past. Not only that MRAs desire that kind of a world, but even the detail that they're unable to directly admit it. Amanda Marcotte, using her powers, should tell me what I'm thinking of right now. Nah, don't flatter yourself. Although the confusion is understandable, it's just a roast beef sandwich.
They instead spew rambling, bizarre rhetoric that, often as not, says the opposite of what their intentions clearly are. It's an attempt to drown you in bullshit until you get frustrated and stop arguing with them. Honestly, a tactic that erupts in any comment section on this subject.
I'm not even going to comment about who is spewing bizarre rhetoric, bullshit, and shutting down discussion. I'm just going to stare blankly into middle space and contemplate what it must be like to have the self-awareness of, well, a roast beef sandwich. Honestly, when she writes shit like that, she must feel as though she's being chased by the ghost of good, intellectually honest Amanda Marcotte. The Amanda Marcotte that existed before she learned that every time she peed herself a little, she could blame it on the patriarchy. Unfortunately, it's not much of a chase, as the shitty, lying-ass blame game shill Amanda Marcotte is at the peak of conditioning.
The Mary Sue coverage has some really fantastic examples of what I mean. For instance, from the Honey Badger announcement of their plans to infiltrate the conference under false pretenses and disrupt it.
And they quote the Honey Badger's Allison Tiemann right here.
In April of this year, the Honey Badgers plan to put on a booth at the Calgary Comics and Entertainment Expo. We plan to infiltrate nerd culture cunningly disguised as their own. Each of us has been carefully crafting a persona of nerdiness through decades of dedication to comics, science fiction, fantasy, comedy games, and other geekery, waiting for this moment, our moment, to slip among the unaware. Once there, we will start distributing the totalitarian message that nerd and gamer culture is perfectly wonderful just as it is and should be left alone to go its own way. That's it, folks. As men's issues advocates and defenders of creators' rights to create unmolested, that's what we have to say to the nerds and geeks and gamers. You are fantastic as you are. Carry on.
Hey, how many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb?
That's not funny.
I mean, if you think that's dodgy, you should see Karen Strom's bio on the Honey Badger radio site, where it's claimed she worked as an international weapons dealer, smuggled plutonium in her bra, and wears a catsuit professionally. However, as a person who published a book with illustrations of a blonde-haired Jane of the Jungle menaced by black men with bones in their nose and flinging spears, you would think Amanda Marcotte would have some insight into what it's like to accuse someone of having no sense of humor. As I recall, she did a lot of that. However, Amanda Marcotte's mental landscape must be like the plot to Seinfeld. Not only is much made out of nothing, but there's no hugging, and more importantly, no learning.
Here's a question. If geeks and nerds are fantastic as they are and should be allowed to carry on, why would you deliberately lie about who you are in an effort to disrupt a convention?
Now, let's just give a pass to Marcotte playing stupid or just being stupid here, as the Honey Badgers were obviously talking about gamers being fine just as they are without their new pop culture feminist overlords coming in and going DEFCON 1 over how big the ass is on some female game avatar. Amanda keeps claiming the Honey Badger Brigade disrupted the convention. The convention was big. It would take a lot to disrupt it. Something on the scale of, say, a Tom Cruise look-alike careening drunkenly between the booths in a state of cosplay wardrobe malfunction that would ruin Arby's for everyone, spouting more concentrated bullshit since Cruise himself reached operational Thaden level 7 and started communicating with trees. But at the scale of who the Honey Badgers interacted with, and the panel where Allison fielded a question, no disruption took place. None. Repeating it doesn't make it true. Not even to the people who took a wrong turn at Gawker and ended up reading Amanda Marcotte's dishonest shit.
Disrupting the convention and trying to ruin it for the participants shows that they do not believe that geeks and nerds are fine and should be left alone.
Thank you, Amanda, for showing a modicum of restraint by not mentioning the satanic ritual conducted in full view of shocked spectators where Allison Tiemann denounced the sacred Yanni while dancing around a severed goat's head, which, like the disruption and harassment Marcotte, the Mary Sue, and the Calgary Comic Expo claim, also didn't happen.
On the contrary, they were clearly offended that geeks are having geeky discussions about feminism and representation in comics and other nerdy endeavors, and they want to shut that discussion down.
Apparently, in Marcotte's twisted little world, participating in a discussion and politely offering one's opinion is shutting it down. And she's the same sort of untrustworthy, vindictive sort of ideologue who is entrusted with writing and applying harassment policies and then searching out new and innovative opportunities for their use. Why would anyone have a problem with that?
Harassing people, by definition, is not leaving them alone.
Which is why, by definition, the Honey Badgers were harassed by lie-tweeting busybodies and the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo organizers who wouldn't leave them alone. You know, that's all it would have taken. leaving them alone. It's not a difficult thing to do. In fact, it's the easiest thing to do. You advertise having an inclusive and diverse discussion, and when someone says something you disagree with, or more like what happened here, someone expresses an opinion that isn't rote obsequious acquiescence to whatever dumb ideological article of faith you hold, even then you say, well, I don't quite agree with you because I'm a hack clown, but thank you for your opinion. You agree to disagree, like normal fucking people do. The alternative, which is what the Calgary Comic Expo organizers, social justice whiners, and screeching third-wave feminists actually did, is to act completely in bad faith, solicit comments, and then, when they got them, go into full-on backstabbing mode, start a whisper campaign, strain all credibility by claiming that people who said something disagreeable when it was really the calmest, most reasonable and innocuous statement in the discussion were some sort of threat, sick security on them, continue to lie, do mental gymnastics, and weather the most awesome Twitter shitstorm and public relations disaster in the wake of harassing, ejecting, and banning the non-offenders for life. And just in case you didn't have enough sheer horse shit to justify, when the honey badgers go to a park to have a little meet and greet with people who wanted to associate with them, you go bat-poo crazy and overstep your already overstepped bounds by calling the cops on them. Now that, like all forms of bigotry, moral panics, and repression, takes work. Now, I don't honestly believe that all this was neurosis and panic on the part of the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo. Once the honey badgers were declared fair game, in the strictest L. Ron Hubbard sense of the phrase, their actions may have been intended to bait the honey badgers into some reaction that the expo organizers could then point to as retroactive justification for ejecting them in the first place. When that failed, they, like Amanda Marcotte, have to fall back on the old standby of completely lying out their asses.
Derailing a perfectly decent conversation is the opposite of leaving them alone. Trying to punish the expo for its perfectly reasonable anti-harassment policies is the dictionary definition of trying to control the choices of others. If you sincerely want to tell people they are fantastic as you are, carry on. You do not harass them, attempt to silence them, attempt to disrupt and destroy their attempts to create a fun conference, etc.
Yeah, well, we're about 2/3 through this exercise in creative fiction, and some people may not believe Marcotte could slip in the claim that the Honey Badger Brigade harassed someone somewhere somehow in here, say, a half a dozen more times, but I suspect she can do it. I have that complete lack of faith in Amanda Marcotte. She has a tendency to use phrases like dictionary definition, which makes me wonder what dictionary she may be using. Because whatever it is, it seems less like the dictionary and more like the Malleus Maleficarum, or even more likely, the Idiot's Guide to Witch Hunting.
Whoa, she turned me into a
If
newt.
anyone was controlling the choices of others, it was the Expo and people like Marcotte who have absolutely no moral qualms about dictating what other people can say and what other people can hear. And as much as one might support reasonable limits on speech, whatever that means, you aren't going to get them by having the limits set by the most irrational, agenda-driven people in the room. And honestly, it doesn't matter how reasonable the Expo's harassment policy is on paper if it's going to be abused in the real world. That was the problem most people had with these sort of harassment policies. Not because people like harassment or think some people deserve to be harassed or want to harass anyone themselves, but because we know the kind of disingenuous neurotics like Marcotte that promote these harassment policies. The people who promoted these policies have been shown, through experience with them, to be mean-spirited, thin-skinned authoritarians, hypocrites, and, in a word, simply assholes who can't be trusted to wield this or any other sort of power over others.
Another big theme of the honey badgers is claiming that they're opposed to portraying women as victims, whatever that means.
Where's that dictionary when you really need it?
The honey badgers are a diverse group of female gender apostates, women who oppose outdated ideas of gender, particularly the association of womanhood with weakness. We offer an alternative to the damaging portrayal of women as victims of geek and gamer culture.
Well, there you go. They just explained it. If any of that is confusing to Amanda, she should feel free to whip out her dictionary, what it is, and look up each word individually. If that gets her nowhere, she might consider having someone draw a picture for her. But remember, no bones in the black guy's noses.
When reactionaries say stuff like this, what it means is that people who have actually been victimized should suffer in silence.
Wait a minute. Reactionaries? We know who the reactionaries are. Those are the people that claim that women can get the vapors, be triggered should they see anything untoward. And suffer in silence? Isn't that exactly what Amanda here suggested the Honey Badger Brigade should have done over their harassment and ejection by social justice warriors, feminists, and the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo? Yeah, she did, didn't she, when she accused them of playing the victim. Since they spoke about the way they were poorly and dishonestly treated, much to Marcotte's displeasure, isn't that precisely what she thought they should do? Suffer in silence? I mean, Amanda Marcotte reads what she writes, doesn't she? Well, come to think of it, I wouldn't if I were her either.
In other words, in order to avoid the association of womanhood with weakness, they demand that women actually be weak. Be afraid to speak up, to suffer in silence, to hate yourself and believe that you deserve it when people harass you, abuse you, or even sexually assault you.
In other words, you think Amanda might mean someone might be afraid to speak up and answer a question during a panel discussion because they might be lied about, harassed, and ejected, and then, just to add insult to injury, have a factually vacant hit piece written about them by the dumbest and most untalented hack ever to be employed by the Raw story? You think she means that kind of afraid to speak up?
When it comes to representation, same story. The reason the Women in Comics panel offends them is because they know that the discussion will be about how women deserve to be portrayed as strong, ass-kicking people, just as men are.
The reality, in fact, seems to be that geeky discussions among strong, ass-kicking feminist women are gossamer frail things that collapse at the first little puff of heterodoxy. It must really piss them off that their discussions can be derailed by someone thinking the wrong thing, by not believing, but to shut down other people's discussions, feminists and social justice types have to shout them down, blow horns, and pull fire alarms. You can't have it both ways. Claim that feminist women are strong and ass-kicking, but then that they get all triggered in a quiver when someone says something they don't like. Come on, show some backbone. Weather the storm of someone saying something that lacks one-to-one bullet point correspondence with the PowerPoint of oppression you bore everyone with. Women can be strong and ass-kicking, but then these women aren't them.
The Honey Badgers prefer a status quo where female characters are primarily weak, used as window dressing and damsels in distress.
Huh? Wait, what? I now know Amanda Marcotte doesn't remember what she wrote just before because, quite frankly, she's an idiot. And no doubt she's tired from this automatic writing bullshit. But does she really expect everyone who reads her out-the-ass stream of consciousness writing to have similar short-term memory problems? She just quoted this.
The honey badgers are a diverse group of female gender apostates, women who oppose outdated ideas of gender, particularly the association of womanhood with weakness.
The honey badgers even have a term for what they reject: damseling. They refuse to act as damsels in distress, which is both encouraged by gender traditionalists and, more importantly, by modern third-wave feminists. And yet Marcotte has the crap foo to call the honey badgers reactionary. The Honey Badger Brigade did not get handed a whole lot of grief and shown the door with no ceremony and even less due process because they claimed women characters were weak, but because they asserted women were strong and not victims. Seriously, when Marcotte makes a blunder like that, having forgotten what she just quoted in the very article she's writing, it's time for her to put her health first and arrange to have an MRI on that 2.5 pounds of damp meat between her ears. Just remind her to take her Anita Sarkeesian Solidarity earrings out first. I know they're probably cheap costume shit, but why should she take the chance of having them ripped right off her head?
That's why they're attempting to disrupt any discussion that would lead to diverse portrayals of women that give female characters strength and agency.
There she goes, working the disrupting canard in there one more time. Ain't she cute?
Indeed, the only people playing the victim as opposed to speaking up for actual victims, as feminists do, are the honey badgers who have put together 4+ hours of online video whining about how they shouldn't have to put up with the consequences of openly and aggressively breaking rules they agreed to follow to get into the convention. Apparently, the only legitimate victims are aggressors who are angry that people push back when they harass and abuse them. Honestly, I worry about these folks. The pretzel logic these assholes put themselves through to justify their hateful worldview is so contorted that I fear it may cause brain damage.
MRI, Amanda. Pay for 2 passes and tip your technician.
The good news is that people are beginning to realize there's no real value in trying to argue with them, as they are arguing in bad faith.
Okay, forget the MRI. Someone who knows Amanda asked her if she's aware of the benefits of trepanation. I know drilling holes in the skull was traditionally used to relieve pressure on the brain, and probably won't do much for a brain that's just imploding before our very eyes. Still, it would be fun to flip quarters through the holes.
Instead, the only thing to do is just accept that this is a hate group and deal with them accordingly. Just as with white supremacists, there's not a lot of value in trying to argue with their pretzel arguments about white pride and protecting white culture. You just accept that they're a hate group and proceed accordingly.
Aside from the fact that the Honey Badger Brigade isn't owned and operated by a Voice for Men or anyone else, whatever Svengali men are calling the shots notwithstanding, hate group, sure. Back in the good old days, he used to source that accusation with the discredited claim that the Southern Poverty Law Center made that determination. When that turned out to be untrue, they dropped the bogus sourcing and just kept the accusation. And so, having gotten those preliminaries out of the way, are you fucking kidding me? Did Amanda just compare the Honey Badger Brigade, who wants to transcend the victim narrative of third-wave feminism and strive for a more inclusive view of gender that lifts everyone up, with white supremacists? Come on, Amanda's better than that. Oh wait, no, she's not. Sorry. My mind must have wandered a bit.
Same story here. Obviously, pro-misogyny groups are aware that their presence is no more welcome than if neo-Nazis wanted to set up a booth at a sci-fi convention, and so they're going to lie about who they are in order to sneak in. But after this debacle, I suspect a little more vigilance will come into play for convention organizers.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for demonstrating everything the honey badgers say about weak women and Gamergate says about the complete lack of journalistic ethics among the self-ordained. Of course, you have to oppose the inclusivity of the honey badgers and oppose Gamergate, because as soon as journalistic ethics gets tightened up a half turn and you have to go head to head with real, strong, ass-kicking women, then you're relegated to blogging about your cats and how they're all a bunch of misogynists. As things stand now, why any self-respecting publication lets Amanda Marcotte write for them remains a mystery. Under that umbrella, I include any restaurants that would give her crayons and an activity placemat to scribble on. I also have to ask why anyone would attend the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo unless they are willing to admit they don't really give a damn about inclusivity, diversity, and actual application of Canadian charter rights. Now, I usually don't engage with those who I criticize, mostly because I wouldn't get much out of it. But I feel I have to address Amanda Marcotte directly here. You see, I had this clip I was going to use in a later video, making the point that the way the Calgary Comic and Entertainment Expo treated the honey badgers betrayed the very principles of freedom of speech, of conscience, assembly, and association guaranteed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and by doing so has presented Canada in an unfavorable light not seen since Stephen Harper, Justin Bieber, or Terrence and Phillip. However, having spelunked through the fetid sewer that is your own mendacious and mean-spirited mind, Amanda, I can't think of a more appropriate place to use that clip than right here.
Suck my balls.
Penis.